Thank you, everyone. Hi. So I'm a technical writer. I work on documentation. I've worked on stuff both mostly for external users of developer tools, and now at Google working on docs for internal people working on development teams. It's something I care about a lot because I've seen how much of a difference it can make. Great documentation can help your team ramp up. It can help users adopt your product. Can decrease your support burden. And we've heard a few other of the speakers, Scott and Lena, talk about the difference documentation can make as well. So I hope that what I can do now is expand on that a bit and talk about how to create documentation that's effective, that's really useful. There is tons I would love to say, but I've only got 10 minutes. So I'm just going to try and tell you my top 5 things that I've learned to try and make documentation better. So firstly, I want to talk about why we write docs, because understanding the reason behind something makes it much easier to do well. And documentation exists to help a reader achieve a goal. It's all about usability, really. So that means that you don't want to start with, how do I document my piece of technology? That's the wrong question to ask. Instead, you want to start by working out, what does your reader need to get out of it? So you work this out, and then you stick firmly to writing stuff down, only the stuff down that helps them with that. Reader needs can be as narrow as, I need to set up this CLI, or I have this other small engineering task. Or they can be as broad as, I'm new to the company, and I need to understand this whole architecture so I can contribute to the team. And your docs will become way more useful when they focus on the bits that will help the readers get that job done, including the things that are relevant, and not including stuff just because it's connected or you kind of know about this thing that's related. So for example, if you're writing end-user documentation for something that, a feature that you've built, you might know a lot about how that feature was designed, what the trade-offs were. Doesn't mean that that's relevant in that context. The question to ask yourself is, does the reader need to know about that? And that's how you decide whether or not it matters in that context. So that leads us neatly on to the second point, which may be kind of counterintuitive, but writing lots is not a good thing. Documentation is at its worst when you have a huge, sprawling doc set, maybe that's a wiki, where there's a lot of information, it's poorly structured, so it's really difficult to find what you need, and half of it is out of date anyway. So don't write more documentation than you can carry. This is so important for writing docs that are not just useful today, but in 6 months' time, a year's time as well. Remember that you don't need to cover everything. Instead, thinking about writing documentation that's what you can commit to, because if you can't commit to maintaining something, it will get out of date. And I'm sure all of you have suffered from out-of-date docs that can be useless or sometimes even actively harmful, sending you down the wrong path. So if you try to be comprehensive, you can end up kind of desperately trying to cover every small thing and not actually adding any value at all. This is an example I love of what happens if you try and cover every single detail. It's much better to focus on a few core things and cover them well. So you have a handful of things that are well crafted than a bunch of stuff that doesn't add very much value. And bad documentation trains people to expect nothing from the docs. So it's well worth weeding out stuff that you know isn't useful or is wrong. If the one thing you take away from this talk is that you go home and get rid of some useless or outdated documentation, I will be delighted. Point number 3 is something that can help with you starting writing, but also makes docs better for users or for readers. I've worked with a lot of engineers who've wanted to write some piece of documentation, but struggle when they sit down to a blank page and don't know where to begin. And I don't do this. What I do is, the strategy I use is to start with an outline, thinking about those questions that we talked about in point 1. Who is this for? What is the reader trying to get done? Asking those questions about what your readers need, and then using those as the headings for your docs. You fill in your answers and notes as bullet points, and you're most of the way to having something written that's useful. At that point, all you have to do is filling in the details. And making sure that you're only answering those questions, that you're only covering those points, helps you with point number 2, helps you to write less. So this helps for the writing process, but it also makes the doc work better for users. Because if you structure that documentation around the information that you've worked out that they need, and you haven't made a stuff a place that doesn't help them, then you've got a long way. And also because those headings, which I'll talk about in a bit, will make your doc much more readable. My next writing tip is another way to avoid getting blocked, which is as simple as talking it through out loud. So the same as rubber duck debugging, where you can work out problems just by speaking about them. I can't count how many times I've sat down with an engineer who says they're not sure how to explain something. And I've said, OK, well, tell me about it. And I've sat there and written down exactly what they said, and that's what we used in the docs because it was perfect. My theory is that we speak a lot more than we write, and so we find it much easier to express ourselves when speaking than when sitting down to kind of write something. So this is useful to kind of get you unblocked. It also helps make better quality docs, because usually a friendly kind of conversational style is much easier for readers to take in. And we have a tendency to be a bit formal and stuffy when we're writing things down, like it's a piece of homework or an academic paper. But you can avoid that. If you read what you've written out loud, you can kind of get the sense of, does this seem natural or not? Is this how you'd say it? So the last thing I want to say on writing is there's a huge difference you can make to documentation's usability by applying some readability techniques. And I'm talking about docs, but a lot of this applies across the board to many types of writing. Part of readability is just making things look less like a wall of text. What you're trying to do is give the reader a way to understand information at a glance. So by using headings, if you're clearly marking the sections of the docs and what they mean, then that helps someone get the information out. Bonus points if those headings are connected to the job the user is trying to get done. If you're writing about things to do with code, using code formatting is something, it's probably what your reader wants to jump to anyway, so you're helping them get to that information really quickly. And when you say, if you find yourself writing, OK, so if you do this, this, and this, and this, and this, turning that into the structure it should be, which is a list, makes it much easier for someone to understand the meaning of that at a glance. You should also try and keep your paragraphs nice and short. This is kind of a bit of a guideline, but trying to keep one idea per paragraph avoids the wall of text. And if you can keep sentences to roughly below 25 words, again, a guideline, but that's what people tend to find much easier to parse. There are also some writing style techniques to help your readers get to the information much more quickly. So the first one is what I call front-loading a sentence, so putting the most important bit first. This first example, you need to do X if Y is the case. This condition, putting it first, means that someone can skip the other thing. You can also just instruct people directly, tell them what to do. This can feel a bit rude if you're not used to it, but actually it's much kinder because it's much more useful to your reader to say, this is the thing you need to do, rather than it's possible, or using the passive voice. This can be used. And lastly, and I mentioned this, trying to connect up your headings to what your user is trying to get done. So rather than saying, we're talking about custom code generation, actually the task for your user might be, this is about writing a custom code generator. So trying to connect these. And I've written up a lot more examples on my blog as well, and I've got a link at the end with some more details. I said 5 points, I lied, there's a sixth meta point. Documentation can be really useful, but we don't write it for its own sake. As I hope has been clear, it's there to help people get stuff done. And often through writing documentation, you discover much bigger problems. Maybe there's the procedure you're writing about is really complicated and messy. Maybe you're building something that has a concept that's really hard to explain. Or maybe you just find out that things don't work in the way that you actually thought they would, or the way they should. If you find, as you're writing, you realize you're documenting around a problem, that's a really good point to think about whether you can make the underlying thing better. Because instead of writing a doc, you can just fix the thing, you should fix the thing. That's it. Thank you.